Hi, I'm Adam House and I'm a fraud. Thank you for joining me for this, the first episode in this podcast series where I invite people that I find inspirational on to talk to me about whether they have ever felt like a fraud. And the reason I'm doing this is because I have found that feeling less than, feeling like a fraud has potentially stopped me from going for that next step, for trying to achieve more, for trying to achieve goals where I get to support people in a wider variety of places. And I wanted to talk to these people because they, from the outside looking in, seem like they've got it all sorted. And if they have ever felt like frauds and came up with ways to get through it, then maybe I can learn from them. And I'm over the moon to say that my first guest this series is the David James. Now, you may know David James from his incredible podcast, the Learning and Development Podcast, and that was where I first came across him. And it was a massive light bulb moment for me because he was the first person in the real world who was much more eloquently than I putting into words the issues with old school L&D behaviors and actually how we can make sure that the world of development actually helps develop people in a meaningful way that helps their businesses and themselves grow. And I've followed him ever since. So when I first came across him, he was at the company Looop. He is now the Chief Learning Officer at 360 Learning. Potentially, he is most notably known as the old Director of Talent Learning and Organizational Development at Walt Disney, the Walt Disney Company. So he's got loads of insight about this. And I was over the moon, overjoyed when he said, "This sounds interesting, let's have a conversation." I'll be back at the end to give a quick summary of what I learned from this great conversation. But just before we jump in, let me just say that I found out when I started editing this that my microphone did not work. So what we have is the beautifully crisp voice of David James, whilst I sound like I'm in a heavily lead-lined bathtub at the bottom of a very deep well. But the conversation's so good that I didn't want to not release it just because I sound a bit funny. So apologies if that annoys you or frustrates you through it, but I promise you it's worth it to hear David James' thoughts on the subject of whether he is a fraud. David, thank you so much for joining us on the first ever episode of Fraud. And I'd like to start by asking you, David James, are you a fraud?
Adam, thank you very much for the easy way into the conversation. Adam, I would say I am not a fraud, but that's not to say that I don't feel like a fraud sometimes. That could be professionally or personally. And I think that the good thing is that years of experience can shore you up against those feelings of fraud, and also life experiences can be easily checked and assessed to make sure that you stay on the right side more often than not. But as I said, that doesn't escape either the temporary or sometimes longer lasting feeling of fraudulence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was one of the reasons that I reached out to you to have this conversation is from the time that I first came across you and what you were doing, and specifically your Learning and Development podcast, you seemed like somebody that had been through the kind of fraud experience in some way and come to some sort of agreement with yourself that you were confident in not being a fraud. I was wondering if we can cast our minds back, can you remember where that kind of those fraud doubts started? And are there any examples of milestones along the way that helped you get past that?
Yeah, so I remember one of the moments that I really felt like a fraud was if I could take you back to about 1998, and I was working in a contact center for a credit card firm, and we were in the business of collections, so people who had just fallen behind on their repayments, and more often than not, you're just trying to help them. And I was sitting in as a team leader on a team of something like 15 or 20 people. I remember there was there were quite a large number of people, and there was a strong emphasis on coaching. So I would sit next to some people, and there were people who had been there for a long time and were much longer than I had, who really took it in their stride. There were people who had been there much longer than I had, who was either not struggling, but with the job, but struggling to maintain motivation. And there were people at various stages throughout the rest of it who could have done with maybe just a little bit of insight. And I realized really quickly that what I could offer them was my attention, like for the time that we were talking, or I was listening in on a call to help them, and then good questions to reflect back. For other than that, they knew the job better than I did. So that's what I did. And one of the times I felt like a fraud, there was somebody who had joined just after me, who I'd gotten on with really well. Not outside of work. There was nothing outside of work, but in work, we just seemed to connect. And rather than coaching her, I just gave her a load of compliments. I was thinking, oh, this one will be easy. And afterwards, I could see that she was disappointed. She really wanted to do a good job. And it was at that moment that I think one of the reasons it stuck with me is that in a moment where I thought, oh, this will be easy and painless for both of us, so I don't need to try. And I think that, for somebody who, let's have a look, how old was I then? About 25. I might have been coming up to 25. It was a real harsh reality check of, oh man, like this, I let myself down, but I didn't know. You think, I said to you earlier about you lean on years of experience. I thought that what I was offering us both was an easy time, and I realized that I'd let her down on her part of the deal, and I think I realized then that I wasn't a good manager. and that was something that I really needed to work on. Because you know what it's like, we've all been there, where you're at work and the managers just look like they talk all day. They don't look like they actually work. So you look and think, God, how easy does that look? It's just meeting after meeting. And then you hear raucous laughter from inside their office. You kind of think, why don't you do this? Why don't you come to help us out? We're struggling here. But and then you actually sit in the seat. I suppose is what they call conscious incompetence, isn't it? Before then, you're just unconsciously incompetent, and there's no fraudulence. There is just a great deal of naive ignorance. But then when you sit in the seat and then you crash land for the first time, that's when you go, I've got a long way to go, and I don't really know what a manager does.
No, it's really interesting, and it's interesting that you mentioned coaching, because that's definitely one of the areas that when I was first tasked with being a coach, you do whatever it is you do to set up for it, whether it's a qualification or otherwise. But the first time that you're actually asked to go and sit with somebody, listen to them or what it is they're doing and help them in some way, the amount of all of the things that you said, they've been doing it longer than I have, they probably already know this, or I've got some sort of friendship with them, so I'll just, mask over the things that I'd ask other people. And it does take that experience to actually realize that no matter the level of experience they have, just having a person to listen and ask questions is a massive help. Can I ask, so would you say that moment of, oh wow, management is harder than I ever gave it credit for, did that put you off the idea of management? Did it kind of inform you in going in a different direction, or was it something that you then thought, right, let's lean into this and see how we can get past it?
Yeah, so I was young and foolish. So my initial response was I want to be better at this. First of all, I wasn't going anywhere. This reminds me of where we're all at in learning and development. Learning
Yeah.
and development looks really different inside organizations to outside. For one, you can't run away, right? A botched implementation like from a vendor, yeah, okay, like you might have done damage to your client, but you can walk away. I mean, or, do you know, or you can hide.
Yeah.
Like, but in this role where I'd had that coaching conversation, that botched coaching conversation, I did need to go back the next day, and I did apologize to her, and I said, look, I'd like to. I don't think I did either of us any justice there, and I'd love to do another one. And she was right up for it, and we did it that day, and it was much better. So I was able to rectify that, but it was because I wanted to do well. A lot of this comes from I remember when I was growing up, my parents always saw that I had intelligence, and perhaps more intelligence than I had effort. And I remember my mum saying to me once, "If you work hard, you could be a manager." Right? So I do remember then thinking. So that was in the back of my mind. I thinking like. I want to meet my mum's expectations here. So there was. I think that we all had that inside of us too a little bit as well, a little bit of pleasing them. So yeah, I wanted to work hard at it. That's not to say that there weren't bumps in the road. I remember another one, Adam, where there was a guy there. He only joined once I was a manager, so he joined my team, and he and I got pally. You know, we used to go for drinks. He was a really good guy, and then one day he called up and he asked for me. Right, so I went, all right. He goes, yeah, I won't be in today. I forgot I've got a scuba diving exam, and here we go. What? You know, you go, right. So in my head, I'm going, I know why you've asked for me because you're leaning on our friendship.
Yeah.
And you think I'm a soft touch. So there was that moment where you go, what do I do? Like, being played a little bit here. And I don't quite know what I need to do. And again, so talking of being a fraud, there was certainly a I've got to deal with this. That I had to absorb a little bit and then play with I've got an Australian friend who says play with a straight bat, cricketing reference. So and I had to do, and it's all of those things that mean that you're not a fraud after a while. But to a great extent, when you are promoted into a position, you may have read the books, you may have been on the training course, but until you've done it, you are a fraud. And I think that the whole unconscious incompetence model is an illustration of that. But it's humbling to experience it and recognize where you are. And then it's another thing in our profession, again in learning and development, to recognize that this will happen throughout your career. And you don't really know much about anything until you're there. And that happened to me again when I reached director level, and I stood there and went, everything I thought about executive development was wrong. I'm now at that level, and this is nothing like I thought it would be, and nothing like anyone else had told me it would be.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'd love to move on to, because having worked in development for coming up to 18, well, there's kind of always been somewhere in my roles, but 18, 20 years, I think it was, well, I'd love to know your journey, because I think within a couple of years, I was starting to question a lot of the presumed laws of learning and development. But at the time, didn't even know where to look to see if it was just me being a bit big for my boots, or if this was actually something. Now, listening to you, you've been really honest about what fundamentally doesn't work in the world of I don't even call it learning and development anymore. I don't use that learning word wherever I can because of stuff that you've introduced me to via your podcast. Where did that journey start for you? And did it knock your confidence, or again, was it kind of a call to arms to try and change what you saw as being incorrect?
The thing is, Adam, when I got into learning and development, I was still in my 20s, so there was still a lot of naivety, ignorance, and maybe a bit of arrogance. The arrogance, which is, I don't, that maybe these are all things that will propel us forward. Because if we did have the heightened awareness that perhaps that you gain with age, or you hope that you do, maybe you wouldn't be as bold and take on as many challenges. So in learning and development, I think I had the advantage in the late 1990s. We're talking about a time before the internet was as prevalent as it is now. You could still read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, the original emotional intelligence books, and these standard business books, and still be ahead of the vast majority of people that you will be in a classroom with. And there's some sage advice in all of them, and there are similar threads as well. So the more you read, the more you find that there's a core, and you in the context of professional development, you could still then have enough about you to guide where people need to be in any particular time. So in that regard, I felt that I was a representative of these core tenets. But every time I moved up a level, I think I realized how little I did know. So I remember before in a standalone L&D role that I had, I remember delivering first line manager training and doing Hertzberg, and you're saying there, people aren't as motivated by money. People around the room going, you don't know my team, right? And going, but and then you're there going, no. These are the core indicators that say these are the factors in which we can improve performance. And people look and going, and there was reluctance there because people were asking for more money. It was a concern for them. I don't think we'd reached a threshold where it was a hygiene factor. These people weren't earning enough in their mind. So I was bold and saying, but there are other levers that we can use. And I think that there was a confidence I had in that message, that when you are then responsible for a larger team, accountable to them to a great deal for their compensation and their improved prospects, you kind of you acknowledge perhaps more in hindsight that it wasn't as easy as you were transmitting in a training course. Then there are times when I pulled together some very senior execs for some mentoring training, and I crammed these people in thinking, right, we'll make it as painless as possible. We'll do an hour of awareness, and answering questions. And I had some of the most senior people in Disney in Europe crammed into this room. And at that point I thought, shit, what have I done? Like, this is totally wrong. This is one-to-one with all of them. And you could see that they did not want to be there. Don't get me wrong. There were some strong characters who did me a lot of favors in that room by being engaged, that I think without them, I could have done myself a lot of harm. Because again, when you are at that level, there's plenty that more junior employees do not know about the pressures you're under, and just how much your work experience and experience of the company mean. You don't need their detail, right? You hear this all the time, and speaking to or presenting to an exec requires a level of insight that you have to trust. These people aren't intolerant of you or your ideas or what you're there to do. But I think that they are intolerant of perhaps things that don't respect a little bit more of recognition of their world. And that's a hard lesson as well. I think that I felt fraudulent many a time when we've all had great managers who say, I'd love to bring you in on this meeting and I'll give you half an hour on 15 minutes on the employee engagement results and what you'd like them to do. And so you sort of stand up, hello, my name is David James. And I'd like to read through the engagement results, right? And then and then you sort of see people's heads go straight down to their notepads, or they get out their Blackberries back in the day, and you're there sweating. You're going, what's wrong? Like in your inside, you're going, what's wrong? How do I get them back? Why is he doing that? While also going, and another area where we need to grow, it really takes something, and I'm not sure what it is actually, Adam. This is, the first time a lot of this come out of my mouth. It takes something to be present in a room, be sure why you're there, be sure what you want from them, and be sure that they are taking value from you being there, whether it's for 15 minutes, half an hour, or an hour. Because until you're at that point and there's near silence in your own mind, you feel like a fraud.
Yeah. And that's really interesting to hear you put it like that. Because going back on a lot of what you've been saying, something that I've found is a lot of people in our industry, especially if you're a standalone L&D person at the beginning of your career, a lot of your success seems to come from faking the confidence or being able to convince a room of people that you know what you're talking about and you're able to bring them along on a journey. And inside, as you say, there's a lot of that. I'm absolutely being fraud here. I remember the first ever official L&D role I got, and I got so much praise from little bits of training that I'd done before getting into it. And then that first time that I was in charge of an induction, that first morning, just wanting to crawl out the nearest window and never come back, because suddenly it was real and these people were looking to me to be the expert in my head, the expert of everything in the world, not just what was on the paper. And that's kind of been part of the reason that I personally never struggled to get past that kind of fraudulent thing. Is I've always had this balance of, I know I have the ability to convince people I know what I'm talking about, but also a lot of the L&D fraudulent stuff that I see out there is people kind of like me who are just very good at delivering a message and kind of masking over all the lack of data that backs up that message. And I know full well that sometimes in the past, either through ignorance or wanting to keep getting a paycheck, I have not been as authentic about my feelings about a certain tool or technique as I would like to be. And I feel that's the balance I'm always struggling with, the knowing the strengths I've got and what I can do versus wanting to be real and authentic about only talking about things that I've used or I've got data to back up or I know works in some way. How have you found that? Is that something that you've struggled with, or has it been slightly different for you in your process?
Yeah, so again, going back to my earliest experiences of learning and development, and in the late 1990s, I remember. So the coaching course that I went on, that while I was the team manager in the contact center, it actually talked in that training course about the learning cycle, and its relevance to coaching. It's talked about learning styles, And there were so many other programs that I experienced, and then I designed and delivered that incorporated that into it. And I think that I did so because I think I trusted the trainer at the outset that this was all important stuff. But as I grew in confidence, I think every solution that I implemented got smaller and smaller and smaller. And I think that whilst that got smaller, consulting conversations got longer and longer and longer, because I think it comes with confidence, but also holding yourself to account that what's the point on delivering something for a day when you haven't done enough analysis to know whether it's the real problem, it's going to have an impact, and then thinking when you're at the front of the room, this isn't going to change anything. Like you're best off to spin it around, because the more analysis you do, you realize the less time you have to take later on down the line, because you are only helping people with what they're expected to do in their jobs, not trying to educate them on everything or anything that may or may not come up during their time in their profession. So, and fast forward a little later, when I was at Disney and I went through some executive development, I think it must have been about 2012, soon after my promotion to director, I went on and experienced the executive leadership program and had a 360. And I thought, do you know what? I've always been quite politically savvy. And so as well as picking people I immediately worked with because I thought that I'd get the greatest insight, I did go to some key stakeholders as well, thinking that if they felt as if they were contributing to my development, then I'd be more capable for them. And also that, there's a little bit of schmoozing in there. Oh, he values my insight. So I thought it would really help me along. And one of the things that was consistent throughout is that I did not engage in business BS. I didn't use business lingo. I cut straight through, and that included learning and development stuff. I didn't talk about any types of solutions or techniques that I would use with anything. I do remember one time explaining situational leadership whilst trying to discourage a stakeholder from just doing the same training for his entire team. And I had to show and say, it's just not what's needed. You get your people will cut out, so that's one way in which I would have used it, but otherwise I got onto the conversation of what they were looking to change, who specifically, and then with more hustle and experimentation than an approach to following any established L&D path, we would just get the right stuff done. And my reviews and my certainly my reputation in learning in Disney was I did know how to get the right stuff done the right way. And I think that I would encourage, and I do encourage anybody I'm working with in L&D to just drop everything L&D about it. You're right. There is so much nonsense. We cling to so much nonsense. And one of the worst things I think we do is we get fixated on learning and really learn. Like it's the way I describe it is learning in the way that we regard it in learning and development is like getting on a bus. Do you know what, Adam? I hate buses. I hate the whole experience, but I know sometimes I have to get a bus because it gets me to the place. But we talk about the bus like it's the place that they should be, like that's the destination, and it's not, right? So the place that they want to be is being really confident at their jobs, doing it as fast, as efficiently, and as well as they particularly should do, but at the same time developing an internal profile that means that their technical competence and their cultural reputation will improve their prospects, and they could be the missing puzzle piece for somebody's organization or department, and then they fit in beautifully, and that's why they were on the bus. But we talk about being on the bus like it's the best thing, and not number one, not I don't believe it, and number two, I don't think it really washes in our organizations. So we should drop that completely, be laser focused on what we are in conversations to address. If the conversations aren't talking about outcomes that improve performance or improve somebody's prospects, then we need to guide the conversation towards that. And that's the outcome conversation. But if we get drawn into the nitty gritty of, oh yeah, I've got something we could try. Yeah, we get just stop it. Like it is, I think it dumbs down our profession. And I think that we gain greater credibility by talking about what really matters and not trying to drag the conversation around to what we think really matters.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's certainly the journey that I've been on, and gaining confidence and experience that actually people want a genuine consultative conversation a lot more than to know that you can quote some book written in the 1970s that a lot of people are still quoting to this day. I'm really interested, kind of getting to the point where you left Disney and you started on what seems from the outside looking in quite a new journey of Loop and podcast and 360, and all of the things that you're doing to present day, which seem to have kind of widened who David James is in the industry. Was that, how much of that was a conscious choice? How much of that was brought on by thinking, well, I'm not even going to put words in your mouth. What were your thought processes to lead you in that direction away from Disney?
Well, first of all, I never thought I'd be on the vendor side. I was contacted by so many vendors throughout my L&D career, and I'd always make a point for personal reasons as well as more benevolent reasons to meet some. I felt that that meeting vendors, especially those innovative and selling something that I wasn't fully aware of, helped to broaden my perspective. Sometimes I was asked to meet vendors from senior stakeholders, in which politically it was a bad idea to say no. And for some, I just felt it was the right thing to do. But the one thing I thought throughout all of those meetings was it just seems so hard to come and pitch something and try to sell something, especially within L&D, because budgets were so tight, and the right need needed to present itself. It almost needed to be a fluke of timing to be able to introduce a new vendor. So I thought that just seems too hard. So I never thought it would be an option. But then when I saw Loop for the first time, and I remember it was the CIPD exhibition at Olympia in 2015, and I saw Ben. It was right by the. He had a great slot for his stand. As soon as I got in there, it was the first one I saw. I went over there, he did a quick demo, and honestly, Adam, the words I said to him were, that's the first piece of learning tech that I'd use myself. And that was a huge realization. I've been pushing e-learning unsuccessfully for the best part of 15 years, but I thought, this is it. So I advised them from afar. They were based in Australia, but we built up a strong relationship. And then at the beginning of 2015, Ben called me and said, it was out of the blue, and said, hey, do you fancy coming and joining the dark side? And those exact words. and do you know what? And it was a no-brainer, because I thought this thing that I've been advising on is looks like the most revolutionary thing that I've ever seen. Certainly revolutionary tech.
Yeah.
And so I did join. Now, I didn't feel particularly fraudulent, because at the time I was reading so much stuff on LinkedIn and on socials that weren't really L&D. I mean, it had all the rhetoric, all this stuff. It goes the way to do L&D. The problem with L&D is that we don't get line managers involved, so it's really easy. Get line managers involved. And I'm reading that going, do you know how hard that is?
Yeah.
Like going and then having a look at the profile and going, no, you don't. You don't know how hard that is. So I was always able to counter. So I found that I was writing about how to actually get stuff done in leaning on 15 years of experience. The best part of a decade in L&D leadership positions, and having a reputation for being able to get stuff done and get meaningful impact. So I found that I was getting a lot of engagement, and people were just telling me, wow, that's exactly what it's like here. I'm going, oh, okay. So then I get a bit of confidence. So instead of just saying about what my experience was and what's worked for me, I started to broaden it and saying, well, maybe you should try this. So then as Loop grew and there was more interest in it, I'd have more prospecting conversations. And I'd say, first of all, I'd start with, well, this is how I would have done it in your position. People would do it. And then they'd go, wow, that worked. We've just implemented this and we've got engagement through the roof. And then I'd say, well, what are you going to do with that engagement that's going through the roof? I tell you what I'd do. I turn that into impact, and I'd actually start measuring whether people are actually performing better as a result of them engaging. So that then I became an expert in my own experience. And then very quickly, the way that I was able to retell that and apply that to situations that I weren't so familiar with was also working. So that gave me confidence. And there wasn't much of a big step, because I think I'm quite conservative in that regard, that I'm not likely to say something that I don't think works. It's got to be the logical next step. If I say something that that I'm taking a risk on, it is such a small risk, and that it was always like jumping from one stepping stone to the next.
Right.
So I'd say that there was no fraudulence in that regard. And then I think working with the team at Loop, we only ever really built the platform that we thought was solving the problems that I wished that I'd experienced at Disney. And then we'd road test it with customers, or we'd do it the other way around. Customers would ask for this, and I'd have a look and go, no, do you know what? I think they're grasping. Let's have, what content are they creating? Then you'd have a conversation with them and go, no, I know why that doesn't work. Nobody wants that content, right? So let's not build the functionality that you're asking for, because the problem is you, rather than the tech. So there was a way in which we could respectfully grow to solve real problems. And that's why I think we had something really innovative, because when a market is saying that the reason people aren't engaging is because the content's not engaging enough, because they're not entertained, there's not enough content, you're looking and going, that's all nonsense. Like, who on earth thinks that? But that's because most of these people have never worked. I mean, I sometimes say, Adam, I know it's quite cruel, my dog Rufus has worked as many days in learning and development as many of these vendors. So of course that's what learning and development looks like when you're on the outside. But when you're on the inside, people don't want better learning. What they want is what I said earlier. They want to do the job better and faster, so that so once they've mastered that, they can then have the profile of somebody who is trustworthy, and that they can take the experience to improve their prospects, because after all, none of us at work because we want to. This is all about working. It's all about achieving what you feel you want to or can do in your career. And if learning and development is distracting from that, because it's a brilliant game that's stopping people from working, I don't know, it's educating people on the broader themes of management, but it doesn't actually help them with the job they're doing. I mean, what good is it really? I mean, we don't spend $350 billion annually on learning and development for everybody to have a nice time and be distracted for a little bit. It is, there are real, really important, critical, I'd say, reasons why we should be successful in our organizations. But as I said, from the outside, it looks very different from on the inside. So I suppose, look, to summarize that, I would see a lot more fraudulent behavior in the market than I've ever felt that I was exhibiting. So in that regard, I think that even helped me to not feel fraudulent. And then you said about the podcasts, which were just an extension of that. I mean, I'll tell you, how unrisky was that? I bring in people with high credibility in the profession, and I simply ask them questions about things that would or wouldn't work in actual in-house. So really, the risk's all on them. I mean, I'd always chip in and make sure that that we were landing conversation points on the actual challenges that learning and development face, rather than what it looks like from the outside. So it really felt and it was nitty gritty, and that's the feedback I get all the time. That when people say that the conversations help them in their day job, because it's not just about the thing. I don't invite someone on and go, tell me about this new tool that you've developed. Oh, that sounds amazing. Tell me how that might be applied. I've no interest. I've never done one and never would. What we talk about is, right, that we got the skills problem. What's really going on? Like, so get into the nitty gritty, right? People say, plug this content in. We've got 10 million bits of content. It's all tagged. And when people get it, they read it and suddenly they've all got the skills. And then, you could hire any of them for future jobs. It's not true. It's just not true. And anybody worth their salt, inside or outside of learning and development, knows that's not true. So I want the conversation about how do you actually do that? And I've had brilliant conversations, and it's largely organizations that have to develop people inside, because perhaps it's not an attractive company to work for, perhaps it's not an attractive industry to work in, or perhaps there are industry reasons why there is a lack of labor in the market. So in order to stay alive, they have had to develop people inside, and that is not plugging loads of content in, letting people self-direct and have line managers coach, and hey ho, a miracle occurred. We turned all that spend into skilled people. So I think that I've been able to be the counter to fraud in that regard.
Yeah, no, I'd absolutely agree, and I think it sounds, well, it does sound like a magical moment of you actually finding tech that suddenly you're like, wow, okay, this isn't fraudulent. I see how this works and I'm excited about it. And then ending up on a journey with it as well. Listening to everything that you've said so far, it comes up again and again that experience piece is it has been vitally important for you to get you to a stage where those fraudulent voices are less, or you're more quickly able to move past them. I'm just wondering, kind of to bring us into the end here, with a couple of closing questions. The first one is, do you still feel a level of fraud, and what does that tend to look like, and how do you get past it?
So yeah, sometimes. So when ChatGPT launched, I will admit, I was moving house in December, and I took off 3.5 weeks over Christmas, very fortunately, because I didn't know when we were going to complete, and I completely unplugged from all social media, all work emails, and I moved in. And at the beginning of January, I remember the day before, coming back to work thinking, how am I going to go again? Like, what am I going to talk about this year? What are going to be some of the key themes? I logged on and it was like, what the bloody hell is ChatGPT? Right. So I had like a few days of what on earth is this? Speaking to people on the phone. We recorded some podcast episodes. I was following what Josh Bersin said, what Bill Gates was saying. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. Now, I do remember reading something maybe 4 or 5 years ago about the potential of AI to write copy. And so my mind was already triggered, but I realized that there was a block on it. And I think it was governments that were really reticent about what might happen. And also, I think it was prohibitively expensive. So me and Ben at Loop did have a conversation about what this could mean. But when it actually landed and it was there, and I actually had a go, I could see how this would improve the 360 learning proposition and how we were at the forefront here, that many learning platforms would need to pivot to make it work. And really, we were already facing the right direction. So a few internal conversations, a few external conversations, and I thought, I love this. And do you know what? There was a moment where I thought, I feel like a fraud because I'm not a generative AI expert. But then what I needed to remember was, but that's what I've never been an expert in a lot of these things, but I am expert on getting the right stuff done in learning and development. So how is this then a tool? So then all I did was make sure I gave it a damn good go. I spoke to the key figures who really knew about this. And then I think I've just stayed the right side of the line, which is how this helps learning and development. Now, what helps me not be a fraud is that I'd say that LMS and LXP implementations largely have been a disaster over the last 25 years.
Yeah.
So improvement on that, I can see the way. I can see how it'd be really obvious. Now there is now I do think that there's a nirvana. I think that there's plenty we could be doing to really enhance and improve the reason we're in organizations. And I think that generative AI can play a part, but that's only as a co-pilot to a very skilled, say, product owner or a product management or a learning development leader skilled in product management. So it still comes down to the skills of L&D, with generative AI as being a really capable assistant. So I'd say that there were moments where I felt like a fraud when it first hit, and I'd say that I've been able to navigate that by being really true to what learning and development is there for, and not think that generative AI was going to be the next silver bullet that was going to save us all from developing our own capability in this profession.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And I was thinking as you were coming to the end, I said I was going to ask 2 questions. And the second one, I've just been thinking through, and I'm going to ask it, but I'm not going to ask it. So the question I was going to ask is if you could summarize how to move past fraudulent feelings, how would you do it? But the reason I'm not going to ask that is you've answered that throughout the whole of our conversation together. I think it's all there. But so I kind of want to pivot and change my last question to looking back over your career to date and all the experience that's happened and all of the key moments where you felt like a fraud and moved past it, found a way through it. Are there any that stick out that if you could go back and give advice at that moment to maybe make you have done something slightly differently or slightly earlier or whatever it is there anything that springs out, or do you feel like you've navigated it quite successfully looking back?
That's a
heavy one
deep
to finish.
question. But so I would say, first of all, I'm really happy about how it's turned out so far. And I'd say that the key things, because the key thing for me in not feeling fraudulent has been experience now, and of doing enough of the right stuff keeps me on the right path, and it's a good check. The things that have accelerated my experience are role modeling and mentoring. So role modeling, wherever I was, I'd always look to the next level up, see people from elsewhere in the organization, see how they carried themselves, and I'd chat with them, and I'd get myself in meetings with them, and I'd just observe, and then I would try things on that I thought that were consistent and compatible with what I was doing. And then mentoring, whether it be a formal, hey, would you mentor me, or just having coffees with some of these people that were role models, just to see what was going on behind the scenes a little more, and then to try some stuff out again. And that has really supercharged my developing the required experience. But yeah, I would say that right at the beginning of my career, Adam,
Yeah.
there was a lost 7 years that
Mm-hmm.
I feel that I was in jobs I didn't want to be in, and my approach to those were to disconnect. And I think that I was a shell of a person getting through each day, where I think now, looking back, there were lessons. And I think that if I'd learned the lessons instead of disconnect, then I would have spent less time in those jobs. That said, I think there's a good book in there that I've been ruminating on recently. Something like what we need to learn to get out of shitty jobs.
Yeah, great title.
But that's the only thing. It's really difficult, because were you to ask me, would you like to go back and change that? I'd say no. But I think that I would have been in a significantly different place, better or worse, if I hadn't disconnected, I had fully engaged and learnt the lessons quicker that were on offer.
Amazing. David, thank you so much for your time today. It's been enlightening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Adam.
There we have it, my conversation with David James. Thank you so much again to David for taking the time to talk to me. It was a fantastic conversation. There was so much in there that I really enjoyed. I mean, so inspiring. There's the things I took away. A big one was that for David, actually, anytime him feeling like a fraud, him taking the time to really kind of dissect why it was he felt like it and what he was going to try differently going forward. I think that ran through a lot of the stories that he shared along the way, from his first coaching experience with somebody they classed as a friend, through to actually talking to people about what development should be and what it isn't. I think it comes up again and again, that his ability to have conversations with people, reflect on himself, and then make changes going forward really stood him in good stead. I hope to get to speak to him again in the future, because I think there's a lot more to delve into there. But thank you for joining me for this first episode. Really appreciate it. And there's a couple of things that would be fantastic. If you think that the wisdom of David James is something that is worth sharing, then please share this far and wide. There's two reasons I started this. One is because I feel like a fraud and I want to talk to people that I think aren't fraudulent and are doing amazing things to see if they ever have. The other is I would love to have heard these messages much earlier in my career than I did. So if there's people out there that might get something from this, please share it with them, share it far and wide. Secondly, please like it wherever you can like it. Help us pop up in people's feeds. And thirdly, and this is potentially the most important one, this is the very first episode of this. And I think we can all agree that David James was beyond reproach. But if you have any feedback for me, then please get in touch however you wish. As I always say at the end of anything that I do where I'm a focal point of it, this should be the very worst I am at this. Because of your feedback and my self-reflection, I should get better and better with each episode. But let me know. Let's take the sound as a given. I've identified that myself, that you don't need to tell me about how dreadful I sounded. That is a technical difficulty that hopefully I'll be able to sort out in future episodes. But anything else, please let me know. What have you enjoyed? What haven't you? But for now, thank you for joining me for episode 1 of Fraud.